It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying, by rayrae118. Chapter 23, Part 2. An hour before the ball, Harry and the other boys went upstairs to their dormitories to get changed. Harry once more thanked Minerva for getting him nice robes as he watched Ron get dressed, trying not to grimace at the brown lace and velvet. At 7:45, Harry picked up a black box and went down to meet his date. Ron and Neville followed. With a nervous goodbye, Neville went to meet Susan in the entrance hall, and Ron and Harry waited for the girls. Ron had finally managed to get a date with Parvati, but he didn't seem to be happy with it. Parvati entered first, and with a badly hidden grimace at his robes, allowed Ron to lead her out of the portrait hall. A few moments later, Harry felt anticipation and excitement rise in him. He knew that Ginny was on her way down, and turned to the entrance of the girls' dormitories, just in time to see perfection. Ginny practically floated down the stairs. The dress was beautiful on her, accenting her hips and chest, but not overly so. It hinted at curves she was just starting to develop. Her hair was done in an intricate knot and fastened with the clip Harry had got her that morning. Her eyes just had the slightest light gold colour across their lids, and there was just a hint of blush and lipstick. She looked beautiful. Hermione came down behind her, smiling wistfully at the look of adoration on Harry's face. If only Ron would look at her that way. Ginny came to a stop in Harry's arms as he hugged her. "You look amazing, Gin," he whispered in her ear. Ginny smiled and took a step back. "You look pretty good yourself, Potter," she admired, taking in the deep green robes and the way they showed off his slim, athletic figure. Harry blushed and held out the box in his hands. "I have one more present for you," he said softly. Ginny looked like she was going to protest, but stopped upon seeing the gleam in Harry's eyes. She just sighed and opened the box, gasping at the jewellery set lying on the black velvet. The necklace was beautiful, with the tiny rubies embedded along the chain and the teardrop emeralds at the bottom. The earrings clearly matched, and she looked back at Harry with tears in her eyes. Harry removed the necklace from the box, gently spinning Ginny around so he could attach it. "I found this set in my family vault this summer," he told her quietly, as he attached the clasp, taking off the necklace she had been wearing already. She turned back around as he finished. "Sirius told me that my dad gave it to my mum for her 17th birthday. He looked a little uncomfortable as he finished. "There's also an engagement ring that matches." Ginny blushed slightly, but smiled, giving him a kiss before she moved her earrings and put the new ones on. "They're gorgeous, Harry. Thank you so much." Hermione waited until they were done before she stepped out. Harry smiled at his friend. "You look great, Hermione." Hermione smiled. "Thanks, Harry. You both look great together. That necklace and those earrings are beautiful." Harry blushed at that, but he didn't say anything, and the two waited as Ginny returned her jewellery to her room. When she came back down, he offered her his arm, and the three made their way down to the Great Hall. Victor was waiting for Hermione in the entrance hall. Harry had to smile at the way his new friend seemed to admire his older one. They were all growing up, and Hermione was turning into a beautiful woman. Harry and Ginny grew several sets of eyes, but thankfully most of the students were already in the Great Hall. Cedric and Shay both gave them wide smiles as they joined the group of champions and dates. Fleur had asked Roger Davis from Ravenclaw, though the sixth year didn't seem capable of much thought in the presence of his date. A fact that Fleur seemed to be completely aware of, and if the slightly bored and exasperated look she was hiding was any indication. She gave Harry a nod and a smile as the young pair joined them, which he returned graciously. They had not had much interaction since the first task, but he had noticed a definite thawing in her attitude towards him. Professor McGonagall came in at that moment, shooing the milling students into the Great Hall until only the ones left were the champions and their dates. She smiled. "We will begin momentarily, and you will all enter and make your way across to the head table for dinner. After we have eaten, you will open the dancing portion of the evening. Does anyone have any questions?" They all shook their heads, and Minerva nodded. Her eyes rested on Harry for longer than the rest, and he gave her a smile. Their dancing lessons had been a bit trying at times, but he felt much more comfortable with the prospect of having to dance with so many people watching him. It had taken several sessions over the last few weeks, but Minerva had finally deemed him proficient. She had been willing and even happy to see Neville join Harry and Ginny, and had dutifully taken up the role of being the shy boy's partner, since he hadn't wanted to tell Susan. She was truly happy to see the friendship Harry had developed with his fellow Gryffindor. She remembered the friendships their parents had cultivated, and it was good to know that another generation of Potters and Longbottoms would stand side by side. Minerva arranged the couples and then opened the doors and stepped back to allow the champions to make their way through the Great Hall. Fleur and Roger entered first, followed by Victor and Hermione, then Cho and Cedric, and finally Harry and Ginny. People were openly pointing and staring at Hermione with the Quidditch star, and more than one person sighed wistfully at the sight that was Harry and Ginny. He would later be told that they looked absolutely perfect together. Dumbledore could not help but remember the graduation ball they had held in James and Lily's 7th year. Harry and Ginny looked so much like his parents it was uncanny. He watched from afar, deciding to maintain his distance after that first and rather unproductive meeting, and was worried how independent the boy was becoming. This relationship could not be allowed to become serious. Harry was marked for death after all, and allowing him to become attached to reasons to fight for life would only hurt the wizarding world. The 4 couples took their seats at the head table as everyone else sat down as well. Harry was less than thrilled to be seated next to Percy, who was filling in for his boss, Mr. Crouch. Over dinner he informed him his sister and her boyfriend, whom he did not seem to be pleased about, of how Mr. Crouch had taken ill and had entrusted him to seeing with the day-to-day operations of his department. His next topic was grilling the pair about how long they had been dating, what they had done, and had they told Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, and the like. Ginny had just about had enough and told her brother, in quite blunt fashion, that if he didn't keep his knowledge private, he would not like the results. They would tell the elder Weasleys next time they saw them. Percy looked a little nervous at his younger sister's glare, but he chose not to comment, and simply said he'd keep their secret as long as they told their parents by the end of the school year. He then asked Harry his intentions. Harry's gaze was steady and calm as he replied, "I care for your sister, Percy. I already had this conversation with your brothers over the summer. I'm 14, she's 13. We don't have it all figured out right now, but I want to see where this goes. I have nothing but the highest respect for her, and I don't have to tell you that she can't be forced into doing anything she doesn't want to do." Percy looked taken aback by the straightforward response, and he was only able to give a nod while his sister gave Harry a kiss, smiling brightly and pulling away. "You keep talking like that, Potter, and I might just have to keep you around." Dessert finished that at the moment, and with a clap, Dumbledore announced that it was time for the champions to open the dance. Nervously, Harry stood up and offered his hand to his girlfriend. The 2 of them made their way to the dance floor with the other 3 couples, as the band struck up an easy waltz. Harry felt himself falling back to the lessons Aunt Minerva drilled into him. He placed one hand on Ginny's waist and took her hand with the other, and the 2 fell into the dance. Harry was thankful later that Colin Creevey had managed to find a date, as the pictures he saw of that night were definitely ones he'd want to frame. They almost looked like they were floating as they moved across the dance floor. After their first dance, more and more couples moved out to have their turn. Harry and Ginny spent a great deal of time out on the floor, before moving to the sideline for some drinks and rest, and simply observing their friends for a while. It was interesting to see the various couples. There were definitely dates he would not have seen coming. Terry Boot from Ravenclaw had asked Daphne Greengrass, and the 2 seemed to be having a rather good time. Fred and George had asked Angelina and Alicia respectively, but Harry didn't know if the pairs were actually dating. From what he saw, it wasn't happening yet. It would soon. Perhaps the most surprising pair was Blaise and Luna. Harry had taken the other boy aside briefly when he had heard about them a few days previously to ask what the Slytherins' intentions were. Luna was becoming an increasingly good friend to him, and he knew that Ginny still considered the odd Ravenclaw one of her best friends. He didn't want the young girl to get hurt by a cruel practical joke. Blaise's response had surprised him. "I like her," he had admitted after the last DA meeting of the term had wrapped up, and all the other leaders had already departed for their dormitories. I know it doesn't really make sense, but she's fun. She sees the world in a different way from the rest of us. She makes me smile. Harry had just nodded and given him a variation of the same threat he'd used on Victor. Luna's my friend, and I take care of my friends. I like you, Blaze, but if you hurt her, I won't be held responsible for my actions. Clear? Blaze had nodded his agreement, partially nervous, but also pleased to see that Harry really cared about his friend. The comment about taking care of his friends also struck home, and he realised that the Potter heir considered him to be his friend as well. Blaze knew that his classmate was promising to be there for him as well, should he need it. Things with Malfoy had been tense all summer, especially with the DA. He had tried to stop the Slytherins from attending, but not very many were listening to him, fewer and fewer as the term had progressed. Crabbe, Goyle and Pansy were the only ones in that year that weren't attending, and it was mostly only the older years that were hesitant. The younger years had been swayed after the first couple of meetings, and were eager to attend every week, praising the attitude of the group and the abundance of help they received. Harry watched as Blaze and Luna on the dance floor, smiling as they moved. His gaze moved over to Hermione and Victor, also enjoying the music. Across the room, Ron was sitting at a table, scowling. He also seemed to be watching Hermione. Parvati said something to him, which she ignored before she walked away in a huff. A moment later, Ron stood up and headed towards the dancing couple that included his friend. Uh-oh, Harry muttered. Ginny looked at him, confused, before she followed his gaze, and her own narrowed. Silently in agreement, they stood up and made their way to hopefully head off a confrontation. They were too late. Hermione was already shouting at Ron while Victor looked on, scowling. Ron? They all turned and looked at Harry. His own expression was closed off, and he had clearly heard a few of his best friend's choice comments. I think you should leave. Ron looked about to protest, but Harry just shook his head. Hermione is well within her rights to attend the ball with whomever she asks her, and Victor is my friend. If you can't accept that, you need to leave. Now. Ron tried to stare Harry down, but the boy who lived was more experienced, and simply held on until the redhead turned around and left in a sulk. Harry sighed and turned back to Hermione, who was almost in tears. His gaze softened. I'm sorry, Hermione. Don't listen to him. You two just have fun. Hermione smiled and nodded, turning back to Victor. The elder champion gave Harry a grateful nod as the pair began to dance once more. Harry turned back to his own date, and with an offered hand, he and Ginny headed back to the dance floor as well. Ginny could feel the disappointment and stress coming from her boyfriend, so after one more dance, she pulled him towards the doors in a silent suggestion they spend some time alone. Outside in the courtyard, there was a beautiful rose garden set up. Ginny shivered slightly, and Harry twisted his ring, bringing his wand to his hand and casting a warming charm over the two of them. Ginny smiled gratefully as the two of them spent a few minutes walking through the flowers until Harry stood up. Finally spoke up. Is it wrong for me to feel offended? Ginny shook her head, but she didn't have to speak before Harry was continuing. I really thought Ron was growing up. I actually thought he would ask Hermione to the ball. Ginny nodded. I did too, she admitted, squeezing his hand tighter. Harry, he's your friend, and he just blew up at one of your other friends. You feel upset. It's natural. We're all growing up, and he needs to figure out on his own. You can't tell him how to feel or how to act. The pair sat down on a bench and pondered the situation for a few minutes. Or rather, Harry tried to think about what to do about his friend, but he kept getting distracted by the girl sitting next to him. His relationship with Ginny had only grown and deepened over the last few months. While he had told her brother that they were young and didn't know where it was headed, he had to admit to himself that he knew he never would want anyone else. He wouldn't tell any of her family that yet, especially since they were so young. But with this bond they had, he knew he would never want to look at anyone else. He loved her. It was as simple as that. Ginny started. Did you say something? She asked, shocked. Harry looked over, confused. No, he replied, confused. Ginny's brow furrowed. I could have sworn. She trailed off, embarrassed. Harry leaned down, caressing her cheek with one hand. What? He prompted. Ginny blushed, biting her lip. I thought I heard you say that you loved me, she admitted quietly. Harry jerked slightly. Ginny looked about ready to apologise, and Harry gave her a kiss on the lips. Don't say I didn't say it, he told her. I thought it. Harry looked up, eyes widening. Did I? Harry nodded and then concentrated. I love you, Ginny rumblingly Weasley. Ginny paused for a moment. I heard you, she breathed. Hold on. She stared into his eyes, thinking hard. I love you, Harry Potter. Harry's smile was brilliant. Do you know what this means? He asked, letting go of her hands so that they could rest his arms across her shoulders. Ginny nodded. It's a soul bond, she whispered, voice quieter than a whisper. Harry leaned down and planted a kiss on top of her head. Rory sat back and turned slightly, so he was facing her on the bench. He stared into her eyes as he thought, we were fated to be together, Gin. We're meant for each other. You're not getting rid of me, ever. Ginny smiled as she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. Good, she thought in reply. It's the same for you too. We belong together, Potter. You're mine. Harry chuckled, hugging her close. Good, he murmured into her ear. The two of them stayed that way for several more minutes, and were only interrupted when they heard a rather interesting conversation between Hagrid and Madame Maxime on the other side of the hedge. Harry hadn't known Hagrid was part giant, though he had supposed it wasn't so much of a surprise. And it wasn't like it had mattered. Hagrid was still the gentlest being he'd ever met. The couple decided to make their way back inside as Harry's warming charm was wearing off, and they wanted to rejoin their friends. As they walked inside, Harry noticed a beetle flying out of a bush, but dismissed it as inconsequential. End of chapter 23, part 2. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this. I love the ball, and Ron's not quite finished growing up yet, and the soul bond's finally finished. Whoop whoop. I love mental communication in stories, it's so nice. I hope you guys enjoyed this again, and remember to like, comment and subscribe and tell your friends so that my channel can grow, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. See you next chapter. Bye!